Great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. It's pretty much 2 o'clock, so just to start out. So, we've all had that point where we work in security. It's interesting. So this is a talk that was about 45-minute talk. I'm trying to jam it into a stable talk. So, the long story short is when you're in security, you're in your SOC or you're in your group, and you get an alert, and you go immediately. You jump into incident response. You're determining the cause, and it turns out to be that missing patch or that outdated application that's still out there, or maybe it's just a bad configuration that you've been say. And what happens when this goes on? Inevitably, one of your coworkers or one of my coworkers will say, "Oh my gosh, if only ops had just done their job and patched that machine and fixed that configuration, we wouldn't have this problem and be sitting here doing this response for 8 hours or 12 hours or however long it took." And how many of you guys have ever said that or heard anyone say that? Just one, a couple of, yeah. So what happens when that, occurs is a lot of times I've already gotten to know ops, and eventually, after everything's calmed down, I'll wander over and be talking to them, and they're sit there griping about security, that how security is always yelling at them and complaining about ops and complaining how bad ops is, and that security just expects ops to fix all their problems that security has that ops should be fixing. And so suddenly both sides think the other group is completely incompetent, and as a result, neither group can work or will work with each other. And how many that sounds familiar where you work now or places you've worked in the past? Yeah. So, we've all lived through this, and we've all are living through this. And so, I decided to try and do a little bit of talk about what I've seen that has caused this problem, and some of the methods I've seen that have helped resolve this problem. And I'm basically calling security and operations bridging the gap. So just a little bit about me. I've been about 15 years in InfoSec. I've done a variety of jobs in information security. I've got some great letters after my name that mean something to somebody. And generally my biggest problem is that the things I want to do are vastly greater than the time I have to do them in. But you know what? Ideally, when you have these two groups, is that they really should be working together. But often the problem is that they're barely civil toward each other, while they're harboring some kind of deep respect, disrespect, or outright contempt toward each other. And so, at best, we have a tenuous line of communication and cooperation, one that really can break at any moment. And what was interesting is that talks earlier in this conference by both Carlos Perez and Jason Street mentioned that this communication is the one of the critical things that needs to happen between operations and security. So what are some of the reasons for this friction? Well, I believe that there are both fundamental issues that are going on and some technical issues that have caused this divide. And so to really talk about how do we build this bridge between these two groups, let's just start first with the fundamentals. So first, the first fundamental that we have to really go over is bad staff structure. And so what do I mean by that? What I mean by bad staff structure is where you have two long lines of authoritative communication that go way up before their two sides actually talk to each other. And so these two groups are stovepiped. They operate in isolation, and this really causes problems between communication, between notifications, and coordination between the two groups. And so what happens is, since one group doesn't actually have to talk to the other group, they often leave the other group out of decisions that affect both groups. So this causes resentment and friction, and this especially happens in places without strong leadership that direct or demand or require that kind of coordination between the two of them. This kind of staff structure also prevents resolution of disagreements. Like when two kids disagree, an arbitrator, usually a parent or guardian, is close by. But in this case, how long or how far do ops and security have to go to get resolution? It takes, escalation and escalation and escalation. And the longer and further that is, the less likely things will be brought up to be resolved. And so, again, conflict and resentment build up. Another challenge is when security and compliance are bundled together. In many industries, compliance is critical to meet regulations. But the problem comes when compliance tasks are placed into the security team, and security is viewed now as compliance. And once compliance is met, no one feels the need to do any more security. And we know compliance is not the same as security. So how do we fix these two things? Well, first we need to change our So how do we fix these two things? So first we need to change our staff structure by moving the junction between the two groups lower into the hierarchy. We can do this physically, or we can do this virtually with a CCB or some kind of single manager. But most importantly, that junction needs to be have some kind of authoritative capability. This junction does not replace direct communication between the two groups at the bottom, but it does allow for a shorter travel time for resolution, for communication, for coordination, where when one group feels like their priorities don't match with the requests of the other group, and allows for a shorter time period to work those things out. The second thing we need to do is move compliance out of security. Security and ops should work together to be compliant, but if compliance is integrated in security, it often prevents an objective viewpoint by compliance to truly audit what security is doing and what ops are doing to meet the regulations or the compliance requirements of the organization. And so if it's integrated, again, it's hard for them to be objective. The second the second fundamental issue that often causes conflict is that the goals are orthogonal. Operations wants things to work. They value uptime, functionality, throughput. Security, on the other hand, we value what our namesake says: security, protection, authorization, authentication, permissions, validations, verifications, but not necessarily restrictions, because I think we need to view security as we want the authorized people who have the authorized access to perform authorized activity all the time. The challenge is the road to achieving these two goals isn't always in parallel, and a large effort needs to be put forth to achieve that kind of cooperation, that kind of operational capability. So, not progressing my slides here. Sorry. So the suggestion really then is that working together requires that kind of coordination, cooperation, and some compromise. Management really needs to get involved and needs to provide the guidance and set priorities for both groups, so that they know where they need to go. Understand what level of risk that the organization is ready to accept, so that both groups have that kind of those boundaries to operate within, so they know where they can go, know what they can ask of the other group, and know when they kind of need to go through and get exceptions. Also, operation and security need to align their efforts with the organization's mission and goals. For instance, if you're running a store and you're advertising the fact that you have the fastest checkout times, faster than your competitors, and then security comes along and adds a step to that process, is that really in line with the or company's goals? It's not going to get. It's going to have a very hard time getting that approved if it really has a chance at all. So creating an operationally secure environment takes a lot of time and effort. I'm not saying that this is easy or simple or a one-step process, but it is it has to be a focused, continual effort. So the third fundamental issue is really the question of who is doing what, and this comes down to a lack of guidance, a lack of the policy that I referred to in the last point. One of the first things is, does each group have their own procedures for the same situation? And, if a server goes down and the security team runs off and they say, oh my gosh, we got to see if it was a security incident. Was this some kind of, and they start going into a little bit of their incident response procedures. Meanwhile, ops is running off saying, well, we got to get the server back up. And so, ops is trying to troubleshoot the crash. They're trying to restart the services. They're installing or uninstalling patches and software and applications, and security's over here trying to get logs, and maybe it's a VM, so ops just goes revert, and suddenly security's going, what the heck just happened to my logs? And so they're stepping all over each other, both trying to do their jobs because they have different procedures for the same situation. So and so the other challenge that comes in is there may be confusion over reporting and responsibilities. Taking that same service situation, security may be reporting that as an incident because they feel, hey, this is something that's wrong, and so now you have an incident response report. It's going up through that channel. But meanwhile, ops is just saying, oh, it's a downtime thing, so it's another tick on the downtime. Maybe that's reportable, maybe it's not, and suddenly each of those reports, each of those follow-throughs and follow-ups are generating different kinds of responses from management, and who's stepping on who's supposed to give what information to who, and that's causing additional confusion. So one of the examples from my organization was we had a new tool that was that suddenly was doing a really good job at detecting adware downloads just from your from going to browsers. And so we're like, hey, this tool can do auto remediation, can detect it, go, oh, we're just wiping it out the minute we detect it. Well, we didn't really there was no actual policy or procedure in place to do that auto removal. And while both sides in that situation said, yeah, that makes sense, it took a long time to actually get those procedures in place, to find the right person to sign off on that, to get both sides to agree for something that everyone agreed, yeah, we probably should just auto remove that stuff because it shouldn't be there. And now that we have the capability, let's just turn that on. And so it's that top cover, that policy cover that wasn't in place prior to that. So that goes right into this suggested solution, which is designating roles and responsibilities, and developing SOPs so that those SOPs are there ready for you to apply to situations as they come up. But the other important part of SOPs and policies that are written out is that you need to also have a methodology for those situations that don't meet something that's already written. So how to handle the exceptions, how to handle those odd situations that may fall out of scope with what is already in place. So now that you've gotten your fundamental issues, now we've talked about those fundamental issues, those pillars that really are there. How do we really build the bridge? How do we build that the things that really now smooth the communication between the two groups? So one of the first things that is just a well-worn path that always seems to come up is the constant disagreement over scanning and patching and secure configurations. You know how this works. Security does a vulnerability scan, they do a vulnerability assessment, and they basically take the results, bundle them up, wrap them up, throw them over the wall, and say, hey, ops, could you fix all that? And then the next week they come back, they run the same scan, they look at it and go, oh, well, they still haven't fixed it, and they bundle that up, throw it over there again. Meanwhile, ops is on the other hand going, why are you yelling at us about this? It's the same old story, the same old thing. These things aren't critical. That particular configuration breaks the application. The other thing I heard a lot when I talk to ops people is that, security, every time they come over about a vulnerability, about a configuration, all they do is they just basically, they just talk down to us. They just condescending, like, don't you know how to do this? It's so small. It's so easy. You should know how to do this. And, ops hates that. And once they start hearing that tone coming from security, they just go, you know what? I don't want to hear them. They're going to talk down to me like I'm a first-year admin, and, I don't want to talk to them. So, we really need to stop that kind of cycle, and figure out how to really make this work better for us. So the first thing and everyone should have. And I understand that sometimes the resources are challenging, but I'm going to talk about it several times. Is that really building and using testbed? I mean, a testbed is really going to save your capabilities, your ability to work together as an environment. Just a lot. And I'm going to repeat that several times. Now, whatever testbed you can build it. If it emulates, one server and one workstation in your 2,500 device environment, okay, at least you have something to at least roll out, patches and configs and do some kind of testing. But with nothing, then your testbed basically becomes your operational environment. And we know, this has been said before, that is not a good thing, to use your op environment as your testbed. We're not Microsoft. So, that's an old joke. They don't do that anymore, but, as much. All right. So develop a test plan for patching and configuration changes so that you can deploy patches and make config changes in an environment so that it doesn't impact your users or your customers. And so that you're able to determine the operational impact or the security impact of the changes prior to rolling them out. The second thing you need to do is review. As security, what we need to do is review and prioritize the patches that we found to be deficient. Just let's stop throwing the whole bundle over the wall and expecting ops to fix everything. So let's take the time to review what was found and prioritize what needs to be patched and protected. We do that with whatever intelligence we can gather, what we know our adversaries are after, and what vulnerabilities are currently being exploited. And so this means really communicating with operations so that they understand why one week we may all be all up in arms about the PHCP vulnerability on the customer-facing server, and the next week we're screaming about Microsoft macros that are hitting HR. So they're, if we don't, without context, they just think security is being multi-personality, schizophrenic. And so, but we provide them like, hey, look, we notice this is going on here. They understand what's going on, and so we have to temper that. So provide them context and priority on the things that we find, the deficiencies. Also, provide suggestions on fixing the problem. If you identify a problem within ops, or within the areas of their responsibility, engage with them to find a solution. For example, a lot of times vulnerability scanners will just say, hey, your Adobe is 2 revisions behind. But that, and their ops is going on, well, I know I deployed the patch. So you have to help work with them to find out which version applies to which machine, and sometimes even what profile or directory on that machine the vulnerability scanner may be targeting. Sometimes that vulnerability scanner just looks for a certain DLL with a certain version on the entire C drive, and it's hidden in some directory that ops, that some install put somewhere that ops doesn't know about. So help them figure that out. And then finally, help them develop alternative mitigations. We all know that there are some applications and some configurations and some things in the environment that just have to be that way. So help them work with them to develop things that still protect what needs to be protected, while even though we can't change the primary issue. Finally, when things do improve, make sure ops gets credit for what they did, not just say, hey, look, we made this place better by beating up on ops until they did what we said. No, but when everyone has a stake in fixing the problem, everyone then has buy-in to the final solution, and everyone should get the kudos for it. The second technical problem to overcome really is when ops deploys new servers or new capabilities, and that deployment is being driven faster than security is comfortable with, or even without security's knowledge. That just happens. You're monitoring your firewall and you're like, whoa, what's this traffic coming from this IP I don't even know about? You call up ops and they're like, oh, that's the new management server for the iPads. And you're going, A, what server, and B, what iPads? But a lot of times those things are not, the ops didn't sort of wake up and one morning and decide to just put the server on. Basically, somebody came down from on high and said, I want this, I want it now, and make it happen. And ops is scrambling to meet customer or management's requirements. And so we're seen, we're seen as basically the holdup, because we're holding up business, we're holding up progress, or we're holding up customer requirements. So this is again a great situation that really builds up and fosters resentment and frustration between the two groups. So how do we limit this damage? Well, couple things. First, again, test bed. Use it so ops can make sure that what they're getting works in the way that they want it to, and security can perform a reasonable security evaluation to determine how to monitor activity, how to secure the device, and the two of them work together so that it actually works in a manner that meets the requirement. And this is where a good CCB, a good configuration control board, or whatever you want to call it, is really gold, because you're able to, if you do this right, ops brings security in as early as possible into the process of deploying these new things, deploying these tools or applications or changes. And so the CCB really should ensure that all parties that need to be involved are tied into the life cycle, from requirements planning to engineering to deployment to retirement. And so each party has their input and can work toward a common solution. And so I want to also say that part of that common solution is making sure security understands the problem that ops is trying to solve. I've seen security put so many restrictions on a new application or a new system that ops can't actually use it to do what they want it to do. Well, now you've just wasted a whole lot of ops money and a whole lot of ops time to solve nothing. And so, again, resentment. And what the other thing that happens is you end up with shadow IT, those things that customers and ops or whoever start doing on the side that you don't know anything about because they need to get their job done. So we also just real quick need to acknowledge that there are times when the requirement for a new app or system comes from so high or so much needed that you just have to roll it out. And this is, again, where you have to work with ops to understand what's going on, get whatever thing is there out and deployed, yet be able to work with them so you can come from behind and say, okay, now that we've got it out there, let's figure out how to secure it, and do it in a manner that still meets the requirement or still gets the job done. So the final technical challenge is when security, that's when we decide to implement new tools or a new process. And so we're stoked about this. Woohoo! More security, more tools, more bells and whistles, more blinky lights, more things being closed off and protected. All ops sees is more things breaking, more customers calling, more yelling from on high because something isn't working. So what do we do to resolve this? Again, test bed. From our side, when we want this, we got to get ops involved earlier in the planning. The big thing is, if we can, eat our own dog food. We deployed a new host-based security system, not HPSS, it's something completely different, but never mind. But and so we made sure that the client was deployed to our machines first. Now, the other thing, when you eat your own dog food, don't take shortcuts around it. You really have to make sure you emulate the user. For instance, who uses NoScript in your browser? Those of you do, or something similar. We're perfectly fine going, yeah, allow that, don't allow that, and clicking that 9 times for every web page that we go to. Well, guess what? Your users don't like that. They don't want to click anything. They want to just go. So so make sure we evaluate it in the mindset of the users when we eat our own dog food, and then do a phased implementation so that you can roll it back quickly or back it out if something bad is going on. So, I'm pretty much out of time, so I'm not going to go through my additional tips, but I do want to wrap up by saying, that really, I want to thank a couple people. I talked to Jason Street. I talked to a young lady named Kay and a coworker Brian, who really helped by providing some additional input into this. And then the key to all these solutions is communication. Both Jason and Carlos Perez talked about even when the two groups are hostile to each other, humble communication will break through that hostility, making sure that both groups understand that they're on the same team, and that working together makes everyone look good. Once that happens, that really is what starts to lower the barriers and help start the process to building the bridge. So that's my talk. If you have any questions, we may have a couple minutes for questions. So yes.
One thing that I've always thought that everyone in organization is cost incentivization. So, people want to do the right thing, but ultimately they do it for incentivized. So, security has security incentives, operations has their operation incentives. But putting operational incentives into security and likewise. Have you ever seen that work?
I have not. I hadn't really heard of that, but that's a good idea. I'm writing it down. So yes.
Sort of a friendly thing, but then afterwards, like if they perform well, there are rewards that come from security, usually in the form of, whatever baked good that they like the most, or what, just different motivators from different teams. Sometimes a promise to ease up on the work required after that's
So the scorecard, in a sense, doesn't carry a punishment, but it does carry a reward. I like that. That's good. So, one more, or? All right, last one.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've seen work at some corporations is something called a security liaison. So you try to find somebody that's in the ops side that has an interest towards security and kind of foster that.
Okay.
And then they can help foster that relationship building between the two teams. Right, so if you're interested in ops, they're interested in security, and you build that bridge between one person, and spread it across the team.
Okay,
right?
Cool. All right, well, thanks. Appreciate that. Thanks, guys.